from Philippians chapter 4, verse 9. Keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. This is the opposite of do as I say and not as I do. When you are in leadership, the spotlight is on you. Such scrutiny. Everything you say is recorded. Your sessions in this house are televised. You are well known, a celebrity. Your face is on billboards and around the country, especially during elections, on every lamppost or pole in your constituency. You live in a fishbowl, often with little privacy, subject to being misquoted and misunderstood. How do you withstand such pressure? You accept your situation gracefully. You respond to respect and deference gratefully. You choose to lead by example. You recognize that you are not alone. There are others in a similar position. My mother was a principal, I became a teacher, I married a priest, and I am a priest. Pressure. You are not alone, though, because you need to remind all parents, for example, that they should be guided by the scripture, that what they have learned, they should be teaching, and their children should be receiving the very best. So every parent is a leader, and every parent is a person of influence. Every parent is to be a role model. But let us take it even further. Every adult ought to be conscious of being a role model for good or evil. Encourage every member of your constituency to be positive mentors to our youth. Encourage your young people to do the same for younger children. While you are in the limelight, you can shine the spotlight on each responsible citizen to build up and not tear down. We are looking for you to teach us, to bless us, to speak truth to and for us, to be what God would have us to be. Then you can easily quote our scripture for this morning. Keep on doing the things that you learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. Let us pray. Lord our God, we come before you asking for you to lead and guide us in the path of righteousness. We thank you for all the blessings of the past, and we pray for strength and wisdom to serve you even more faithfully in the future. Heal our land, Lord, and prosper us in all things pleasing in your sight. We thank you for our many blessings, the harvest of happy memories, for those known only in small circles, but who have been powerful, inspirational leaders in their own right. May we all set godly examples for each other, and especially for our younger ones. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And let us pray together, our Father, who art in heaven.
Who art in heaven,
Hallowed be thy
name,
thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
Dr. Hubert Minnis, Peter Turnquest, Brent Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Brentwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sands, Marvin Danes, Frankie Campbell, Dionisio Diaghilev, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Romuald Ferreira, Denisa Roll, Brenzo Roll, Alfred Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Lakeisha Parker Edson, Aaron Lewis, Carlton Bowleg, James Audrey, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Fultz, Miriam Bresley Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Ruben Ramney, Ricky Mackey, Shannon Don Cartwright, Sonal Ferguson, Leonard Hannah Martin, Michael Ford, Chester Cooper.
Thank you, honorable members. And a very, very happy Thanksgiving to all of us, this is the period in the year when we pause to recognize the goodness of God and to give God thanks for all that He's done for us. We give God thanks and glory for good health and strength for a nation under peace, a nation where the citizens have the opportunity and the right to worship God, the constitutional right to assemble, to demonstrate, and to voice their opinions. We have to thank God also for the respect and the recognition of our women in our society. And we are so pleased this morning that we have a group of women in our midst to us. They are the Rose with us this morning, the Roses. They represent the Zonta Club under the chairperson of Marissa Mason Smith. And she's accompanied by Stephanie Anwala, Sharice Archer, Latoya Johnson, and Miss Chanella Cunningham. Can you stand for us, please? Thank you very much. I also understand that we expect another group to be with us, but the Zonda Club is here in respect of the recognition for National Women's Week. And later on in our order of business, the Minister with responsibility will address the Parliament in that regard. A second group we are expecting to be with us that we intend to recognize when all of them are here, but just to mention who they are a number of sports heroes who have been recognized as Hall of Famers in the Bahamas. They are going to be inducted later this week, and they include Agatha Delancey, Harcourt Poitier, Cornell Williams, Samuel Simonet, Peter Gilcoot, Cresswell Pratt, Edmund Lewis, Wellington Raming, and posthumously Jennifer Mortimer and Arthur Thompson. Any members of that delegation present with us, can you please stand? We recognize Mr. Cresswell Pratt, and at the entrance door we recognize Peter the Macaroni Gilcoot, a former teammate of my own. Proceeding now with the order of business. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the House a copy of the following. The Economic Empowerment Zone Act 2018, appointed day, notice 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following Fiscal Strategy Report, November 2018.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Chair recognizes the Honorable Member for St. Ives.
Mr. Speaker, I have begged leave to lay on the table two documents. I'll do the first one and then obviously the second one. But just as a precursor of it, the first is a bill for an act to amend the Arbitration Act, and the second will be a bill for an act to provide for international commercial arbitration. The typo. Just to let persons know who are listening in the House and also listening, this has been a long procedure that has been outstanding with regard to moving towards arbitration, and we're laying these two documents today for discussion purposes, not necessarily to move them in short order. So that the bills now, so they will be for discussion purposes, not necessarily for movement in this year. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table a bill for an act to amend the Arbitration Act 2010.
Honorable Member, if we can do that when we arrive at first reading of bills on the order of business.
Reading, yes, sorry.
Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Marathon.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Declaration of Big Pond Park as a public park notice 2018, and the Bahamas Public Parks and Beaches Edmund Spencer Moxie Park notice 2018.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the document be brought up. Order that the documents will lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. Statements and communication by ministers. The chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Southern Shores.
Mr. Speaker, as we are in the season of celebrating Thanksgiving, I want to take this opportunity to give thanks, first of all, to Almighty God for His many blessings on me. And then, of course, I always take the opportunity to thank the good people of Southern Shores who have reposed the confidence in me to have me here speak for and on their behalf. If you would permit me, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to extend condolences to the John family on Cowpen Road on the passing of Miss John, the leader of the household. Mr. Speaker, I have the privilege of acting for the Minister of Youth, Sports and Culture, who is out of country on official business. And so in that regard, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate our two Hall of Fame inductees here present and the others who I'm sure are on the way. Mr. Speaker, as a small nation, we have long been punching above our weight, far above our weight, as I am corrected. Individuals and teams have placed us on the world map in various sporting disciplines. We've been able to win gold and gold and gold. We've been able to place top in the world. And Mr. Speaker, aside from the discipline, the training, the hard work necessary for these accomplishments, we give credit to ourselves as a nation for the support that we give to our athletes, many times not enough. But in addition to that, what is more outstanding, and we don't speak of enough, is the recognition that these individuals cause us to have in the world. When we have in the NBA, Bahamians proud to wave their flags during games, or baseball players, track and field athletes, sailors. Mr. Speaker, I want us as a nation to be reminded that the recognition that we get through our athletes, we couldn't pay for in advertising dollars. And so I hail this group of freshman inductees. I have an opportunity to speak to you a little more at a luncheon, and then we will speak a little more at Government House when you will be formally inducted. But on behalf of the minister who is not here present, on behalf of the ministry and the government, I congratulate you. And now to social services. I'm pleased to stand in this honorable house to present a brief report of the proceedings of our country's representation before the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Additionally, I will highlight the International Men's Day, National Women's Week, and United Nations observance of 16 days of activism to end violence against women and men. Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, is among the most widely ratified international human rights treaties with 189 member countries around the world. On Thursday, October 25th, 2018, in Geneva, Switzerland, the Bahamas made its second appearance before the committee to present its sixth periodic report on the country's implementation of the convention during the 71st session of the CEDAW committee. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian delegation included Mr. Frank Davis, Chargé d'Affaires, Deputy Permanent Representative at the Permanent Mission of the Bahamas in Geneva, Dr. Jacinta Higgs, Director, and Mrs. Melvin Simonet, First Assistant Secretary of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, Ms. Jewel Major, Chief Counsel, and Ms. Alicia Gibson, Assistant Counsel of the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs, Ms. Sherry Ambrister, Senior Nursing Officer, Ministry of Health, Ms. Charmaine Sinclair, Assistant Director and at the Ministry of Education, Ms. Sasha Dixon, Second Secretary, Permanent Mission of the Bahamas in Geneva, and Mr. Celsus Williams, Assistant Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On behalf of the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, I extend sincere thanks to all members of the Intersectorial CEDAW Preparatory Task Force for the diligent research done by the various ministries. Mr. Speaker, the CEDAW goals, mandates, and articles signed by the Bahamas in 1993 are honorable and just. However, the process towards elimination of discrimination is a journey and not a destination. I was deliberate to share with the 23 CEDAW committee experts that our collective hope and political will for the achievement of full equality for men and women are significant. Mr. Speaker, the convention has 16 articles which cover matters of constitutional rights, political quota opportunities for women, trafficking in persons, etc. Mr. Speaker, the delegation did outstandingly well, as over 100 questions were fielded to us from the committee experts concerning the diverse range of issues covered by the convention. There were moments when the experience grew intense, and I wish to report that every member of the delegation responded with integrity, grace, and substance. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, after 5 hours of constructive dialogue and scrutiny of our responses, the CEDAW committee members, including Marion Bethel, a Bahamian expert on the CEDAW committee, our non-governmental organization representatives from the Bahamas, as well as the entire Bahamian delegation, celebrated our performance and excellent engagement on the issues. Mr. Speaker, the chair of the CEDAW Committee of Experts complimented our efforts and initiatives, especially the accomplishment of Bahamian women in public life at the national and international levels, the goals and pursuits of the National Strategic Plan for Ending Gender-Based Violence in the Bahamas, the newly strengthened partnership with many NGOs, the updated National Gender Equality Policy, the school and community awareness raising seminars about CEDAW held in New Providence and the Family Islands, collaborated observances with the National Women's Advisory Council and civil society, and the rural women sponsorship in South Andros, Acklands, Crooked Island, and Cat Island. Mr. Speaker, I'm so very proud to report to you that following our presentation, several of the CEDAW committee experts agreed that our accomplishments and dedication to fulfilling the mandates of CEDAW were noteworthy, and that they are interested in coming to the Bahamas to assist us with capacity building in respect of a few challenged areas or gaps in our reporting. In the concluding observation from the committee, it was noted that the Bahamas must fulfill the following: the need to address discriminatory laws as pertains to passing on nationality by married women to their children, need for quota for women to participate in frontline politics, for stronger female representation in Parliament and Cabinet, need for increased structured education and training of our judiciary on the human rights conventions and in particular CEDAW, the need for cross-sectorial engagement on women's rights and mainstreaming to complement the work of the national machinery, the need for strengthened data collection and analysis, including disaggregated data, the need for more scientific research for projects and programs so that time-bound targets and evidence-based support reporting of the measurable results of initiatives are possible, and the need for gender-based violence secretariat to assist with gathering data, identifying trends, and coordinating the overall execution of the solution for gender-based violence. Mr. Speaker, there were many remarkable successes mentioned, yet there is much work to be done in our pursuit of full compliance with the convention. We endeavor to press onward together so that during our next reporting session in 2022, we will have made many concrete strides. That said, Mr. Speaker, we are also endeavoring to ensure that our efforts towards the removal of discrimination against women and full equality is not merely for the purpose of reporting, but to ensure that we're able to add the necessary quality to the life of our citizenry. I now turn to National Women's Week, Mr. Speaker. 56 years ago, the women of the Bahamas fought for and achieved the historic universal right to vote during the women's suffrage movement. Persons like Mary Ingram, Georgiana Simonet, Eugenia Lockhart, Mabel Walker, and Doris Johnson are the prominent Bahamian women who were at the forefront of this momentous feat. Their leadership paved the way for the advancement of women in the Bahamas, and the Most Honorable Prime Minister Hubert A. Minnis has proclaimed Sunday 25th November to Saturday 1st December as National Women's Week. This annual national observance is meant to spark positive pursuit and achievements for thousands of women in social, economic, health, education, and political domains. Mr. Speaker, the Department of Gender and Family Affairs of the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, along with the National Advisory Council, the National Women's Advisory Council, and the community of non-governmental organizations, including Zonta, who I'm pleased to have here with us. You would have already recognized them, but Mr. Speaker, they are also accompanied by staff from the ministry. I had the pleasure this morning to be allowed to tie the first ribbon, the first orange ribbon on Christie Park, where the Zonta Club launched a campaign to end gender-based violence, a campaign to break the silence against and about gender-based violence, a campaign to sensitize perpetrators of the need to be humane, a campaign to sensitize victims of the right to speak out, to sensitize and empower victims to remove themselves from toxic situations, a campaign geared towards ensuring that young girls and women know the importance of getting a sound education to put them on a proper economic footing, that they will not be forced or feel the need to remain in a toxic relationship merely because the perpetrator is the sole provider. And so, Mr. Speaker, I applaud the work of Zonta. I thank Zonta and the many other non-governmental organizations that have come forward to partner with the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, because we're satisfied that no government can do this work alone. And so I take this opportunity to stretch out my hand and seek further partnerships as we continue in this work. Mr. Speaker, National Women's Week will begin on Sunday, 25th November, with an 11 a.m. church service at the Bahamas Harvest Church, located on John F. Kennedy Drive. On Wednesday, 28th November, leaders and members of all political parties, all political parties are invited to a Women in Politics conclave. And on Friday, 30th November 2018, a Women Empowerment Summit and Expo will be held for all female-led non-governmental organizations. Mr. Speaker, I invite the women to participate. I invite our men to support. I now highlight 16 days of activism to end violence against women. Mr. Speaker, 200 countries around the world are doing the same thing that Zonta is doing. The color orange has been chosen. There are persons in the corporate world who've sponsored orange light bulbs. Zonta is wearing the orange shirt because of the protocols of the House, Mr. Speaker. I couldn't put on my orange shirt, but I assure you, I got on my orange socks, Mr. Speaker. I am in full support. I urge our membership here in this honorable place to demonstrate our support by participating in some of the events, by speaking about them in on our various platforms, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this has been a busy month in the Ministry of Social Services, because we also had the opportunity for the first time to join with the men who joined 70 other countries in celebrating on Monday the 19th, National Men's Day. It's not a part of convention that we're signatory to, but I am pleased to see that Mr. Keith Cox was joined by other men like Mr. Jackson McIntosh and Mr. Terrence Bethel, who came together because they saw the need to address matters concerning men. Mr. Speaker, I assure you, as I would have already satisfied the women, that this is by no means a competition. But I assured them that the same Adam that was under attack in the Garden of Eden continues to be under attack in the Bahamas. And unless we save Adam, all is lost, Mr. Speaker. And so I invite the women to partner with the men and the men to partner with the women, because at the end of the day, all of these efforts are simply about the rights of the individual, are simply about human rights, are simply about mutual respect one for the other. I'm satisfied that if we remain mindful of those points, we will be able to coexist. We will be able to defend each other's rights to speak, even when we disagree with what they are about to say, because we're satisfied that they too will allow us to speak, even when they disagree with us. Mr. Speaker, I commend these few words as I celebrate our women and men. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Just before we proceed with further statements and communications by ministers, I see that we have assembled now with us the full contingent of the Sports Hall of Fame inductees. Can you please stand for us? I see another familiar face whose name wasn't called initially, Charlie Softly Robbins. We welcome you. Thank you very much. Further statements and communications by ministers.
They move on to further communications, that they be allowed to at least speak to the two occasions that's being celebrated here, the inductees and the Women's Day.
Yes. Would you be doing it?
Well, I will ask. Only this being a gender matter, and we cry about the fact and lament the fact that we don't have sufficient women represented here in this hollow chambers. I will concede that aspect of it to the member from Angliston, and I'll speak to the Hall of Famers, many of whom I have known very personally. Many of whom I've known personally, and who brought much delight to my life during my sojourn, during what I thought to be my youthful and athletic days.
Thank you, Honorable Member, for Carroll. In keeping with ladies first,
Thank you.
the chair recognizes the Honorable Member for Angliston.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, I thank the House for the opportunity to join in celebrating the Zonta Club. They have had a history, Mr. Speaker, in terms of promoting and helping to develop young women. In fact, I remember that my daughter, when she was about 15, she won the essay or debate competition. I can't remember what it was. And the prize was a trip to the United Nations. And it was an incredible experience for her. And she is one of many young girls and young women who have had this opportunity. They have purposefully and uncompromisingly pursued the interests of girls and women. And it's interesting because it's one of the few instances I can say I have truly seen that type of undiluted commitment towards promoting the ideals of equality and trying the catch-up for women and girls. I heard the communication by the minister. I want to thank him for his work and his team in Switzerland, and only to say that I am hoping that one day we will not have these conversations that we're having in this parliament about the fact that women continue to be the this, the that, the least this, and the most that, and that at some point we will realize concretely and manifestly the advancement of women. And truthfully, I believe it begins in a place like this and in political organizations, because politics is where you create policy, policy is where you affect change, and truthfully, I don't know if we can point, apart from the attainment of the franchise in 61 and the first vote in 62, I'm not sure how many things you can point to since then where there was a purposeful, focused effort to cause for women to attain full legal rights. We've had attempts at referendum, we know about that, so I ain't getting into that now. But we will do, I am saying that in political organizations, that we should ensure that women are sufficiently represented as candidates in general elections. And not just in seats that are hopeless seats, you can't win, but seats where there are viable and real chances for women to be elected, so that women can have voices in this parliament. And when, yes, and when women come, we don't just toe the party line, as we may or may not do. I'm not mashing any corns here or there, but that we speak to the principal issues that impact the well-being of women. I personally am sick and saturated of hearing that women are the most vulnerable to domestic violence, not the rights and constitution, I'm sick of it.
And we have to commit in a serious way, and it happens in here. If you're serious, you're serious. If you ain't serious, you're just talking. We got to commit in a serious way for women to attain full legal rights in this country. And coming out of that, you will see more enhanced social interactions between men and women. You agree with that? And so I'm just saying, I'm talking to everyone, both sides of the political divide, because we've all had the talks. We want to see the walks now. We want to see women attain full rights. We have daughters, or those of us who have daughters. We know our daughters can do anything they want to do in this country. And we want no barriers to their progress and advancement. And let me just say, and I'm going to sit down now, Mr. Speaker, it's harder for women in politics, but I ain't going to talk. I ain't going to Oh, Lord. Mr. Speaker, it's rough. Speaker, it's rough. It's rough. It's rough, Mr. Speaker. It's rough. It's rough. But anyhow, I won't go into details. And I won't show my wounds and all that, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage the minister to keep going. But we got to get beyond this conversation because it becomes, look, no disrespect, stale. We want to see progress, light, action, lights in action. And so, again, to Zonta, congratulations. Keep it up. Y'all are leading the charge, and hopefully a lot will catch up with you. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumpke, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I share the views of the member, and I wish to also congratulate the Zonta Club. And of course, I sleep with an advocate almost every night, and I have to sometimes wonder whether I'm being abused because of her passion to ensuring that I understand what women go through sometimes in society. But she is very passionate about it, and I know she would be remiss if I didn't mention her role with Marissa and those in promoting the efforts of stopping domestic violence and promoting gender equality. And so as I said, I sleep with it every night, and so you could know I miss you, and I share your concerns and promote you. I have 3 lovely daughters, all of whom are doing quite well, as the member, and I support them. And of course, I'll leave it there because, you know, if someone touched them, we all know what happens with fathers and their daughters. And if we carry that same feeling of fathers and daughters into our public life and everything we do, and appreciate that every woman is like your daughter, I think we will have a better understanding and appreciation of the worth of women, period. Mr. Speaker, we mark again the presence of those who excelled amongst us in various disciplines of sport. Mr. Speaker, I'm a big believer that the creative industries, which include sporting activities, is perhaps an area where much new revenue could be generated for our country. And I think in lifting up the lives of those who went before in the field of their endeavors in sport will help us to appreciate that those who will come behind, that there's much to be gained for the country if we were to promote it properly, and government has to take the lead in that respect. Now, forgive me if I choose Crystal Pratt first, because he played the sport I liked, baseball. Let's go to baseball, right? Because I think Crystal was in the Cincinnati Reds organization, and he was there when we had another Bahamian there, or 1 or 2. Pat Ingram was in there, and I remember Pat Ingram because when he came to Grand Bahama, I was staying in Grand Bahama at the time, I was the center fielder for ARA Eagles. and when he came in, that's when I moved to the infield. No, baseball. That's when I moved to the infield. That's when I moved to the infield. But I mean, Cresswell gave much pride to us who followed baseball, because I think he ought to have been in the majors. If I'm not mistaken, I think he was one of the first Bahamians who won a triple crown in the minor leagues. I think the next one who came near to that, and I'm not sure, but was Jason Moxley, Ted, who was close to that, and then he was in the Houston organization. And so baseball was the sport. It was the ticket for us to spread our wings and to become, and that's where the Bahamas became very well known through baseball, right? And Wichita, and I take the opportunity now when you talk about Wichita to mark the passing of Cinderella, Frank Keating, who earned the name Cinderella because of his exploits in the Wichita tournament as a pitcher. We laid him to rest last Saturday. And he too was one of our iconic sporting figures. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, I urge the minister, let's finish that baseball stadium. We have today about 22 young players in the minors right now, knocking on the door to the major league, right? And what a testimony to that, if we can have a proper facility for them to be playing in. And of course, baseball was the sport in the 60s, early 70s. But Bahamians, we like to follow fashion. Now, baseball was our sport in the 60s and 70s because we had the Cresswell Pratts, right? The Andre Rogers, the Tony Currys, right? The the Eddie Fords and the Rennie Fords. And so everybody wanted to be like them. But then lo and behold came Michael Thompson in 1978 from the University of Minnesota, the Gophers. He was chosen the #1 in basketball in the NBA in 1978, the first Bahamian to do so. But before Michael Thompson, there was someone called Cut. Peter Gilcott was also a Gopher, right? Basketball. Are you in Minnesota? How come I never saw you there? I used to be in Minnesota for many years, going there to watch the Gophers. I can't remember. I used to go up there to watch our Bahamians play because I took pride in their exploits with Goose Lockhart. Now, and so when that happened, everybody wanted to play basketball. Yeah, everybody wanted to play basketball, and basketball became, huh? No, I just like it. And so, I'm a hacker, man. When it came to basketball, I was a hacker. Right? And then of course Charlie Robins Softly, who was a household name in the Bahamas when it came down to basketball. The Colonel, yeah, Kentucky Colonel. And so we have baseball, basketball represented, and then of course Coins Poitier. Now you know the name Poitier, that's Cat Adams. So so I have to, I can't Harcourt, Coins Poitier, and of course Agatha Dean, both of whom exemplified themselves and raised themselves up in the sports of golf. Not just playing for Agatha, but Agatha was also in the administration of the sport for many years as well. I want to congratulate you, Agatha, for what you have done. You earned it, and you deserve it, particularly for sport. And of course, Edmund Lewis, cricket, who, the thing about cricket is that cricket is supposed to be our national sport. But I think we lost that flavor of nationalism when Andre Rogers and Lionel Rogers, who played excellent cricket back in the 50s, were plucked out and signed with the Giants to play baseball. And so, you know, cricket lost its vitality then. And of course, and the Hamish just followed baseball after that. But
Honorable member, you're doing an excellent job, but this is Women's Week, and I want to give an opportunity.
That's a little historical perspective of our sporting icons in the various sports they were in, and to say that how appreciative we are of it, and that each of them are deserving of the award of being Hall of Famers in our country. We thank you for what you brought to us all.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Members, we also have in our midst, in this hallowed chambers, not only a female representative, but also a sports personality, a sports icon. We recognize the Honorable Member for Fox Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy for this opportunity to speak to Women's Week and also to congratulate the new inductees into the Bahamas Sporting Hall of Fame. They seem to follow the norm. There's one woman among them, and there seems to be one woman everywhere. But it's a thing that needs to be changed. It's something that needs to be worked on. One is never enough. I think King Eric had the song, once is never enough, even twice. You don't see all of these stuff. So this is, as the member for Angliston said, we have to stop starting over. We have to be moving always forward in terms of women's rights. To the Zonta Club, I am just so pleased at the work that you are doing and have been doing. Back in 2012, you plucked me out and recognized me as a living legend. I never thought of myself as such, but you certainly did, and I thank you for that. I don't know if you know what a difference you make in the life of young women, girls, and women in general. And you deserve every support that you can get from this government, from the country in general. So keep on keeping on. We're with you. And to the sporting heroes, I remember Cud Macaroni. I was a schoolgirl when I made my first Pan-American games, team. And this was the games which meant that there was track and field, basketball, volleyball, everything. And I was still in St. Anne's School, and we got to Mexico City, and I was the little sister of people like Sterling Quant and Peter Gilkes. We owe a debt of gratitude to all of you. I'm glad that the Hall of Fame is ongoing, and year after year it's still happening. But I would like to see some things that happens in other countries, that when we have events, that we coach you out and you're able to like sign your autograph for lots and lots of money, and that people realize the value that you have to this country, not just to coach you out once a year that this thing has happened and now, well, we won't, you know. So congratulations, and God bless you, and we love you. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Back to the order of business. Further statements and communications by ministers. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rose a little too early on the other issue, but I beg leave to introduce and have a reading for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Arbitration Act 2020.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that the following bills be read for the first time. A bill for an act to provide for international commercial arbitration. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to provide for international commercial arbitration.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to lay on the table the first reading an act to provide to amend the Arbitration Act. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, these two are to go out for discussion. The idea is we want to get the views of the public on international arbitration as a new area to grow the financial services industry, and also to amend the Arbitration Act so domestic arbitration is dealt with in locally and not involved with the proceedings under the international commercial arbitration. These are for discussion purposes. We have been discussing with the industry, but now we want to take it to the next level of laying the two bills on the table. So I move to beg leave to lay on the table the first reading, an act to amend the Arbitration Act.
Thank you, honorable member. Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Arbitration Act 2010. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Arbitration Act 2010.
Further first reading of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce and have read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act. Mr. Speaker, we recognize the problem some individuals experience with electricity bills, and this bill would allow the VAT exemption for those bills who are less than 200 as we passed. We're now making an amendment to increase that. Your bills are 300, you'd be VAT exempted.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for the first time. A bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act. As many as in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Value-Added Tax Act.
Further first reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I start, allow me to congratulate the Hall of Inductees, Sports, and to congratulate the Zonta Club. Mr. Speaker, we have two bills this morning, and these bills are interchangeable. It is our intention to discuss both bills together, as they both refer to activities of the central bank. That is the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2018 and the Banks and Trust Companies Regulations Amendment Bill 2018. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present to this Honorable House the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Amendment Bill 2018 and the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2018, which jointly seek to introduce necessary and important reforms to the dormant account regime in the Bahamas. These legislative amendments, Mr. Speaker, aim to address problematic administrative issues. You texting your people, eh?
Leave that mark outside.
These legislative amendments aim to address problematic administrative issues encountered by banks, to codify existing administrative practices by the Central Bank of the Bahamas, and then to modernize the regime in line with prevailing international practices. To provide some background, dormant accounts legislation, Mr. Speaker, was introduced in the Bahamas as far back as 1989. And the legislation required all banks to transfer dormant account balances to the central bank, which is charged with the custody and administration of these balances. A dormant account is defined as one in respect of which banks record no customer transactions or contact for a period of 7 years. And since this legislation was introduced, there have been no changes to the regime since 1989. And over the years, Mr. Speaker, both the banks and the central bank have experienced numerous challenges with different aspects of the administrative regime for dormant accounts. The main issues, Mr. Speaker, were how to deal with funds, assets, such as checks, money orders, precious metals, and securities that are excluded from the very narrow definition of dormant accounts. Other issues, how to treat securities that qualify as dormant. Other issues, how interest is to be paid on claims of dormant accounts. What should happen to dormant accounts that may never be claimed? And finally, another issue, Mr. Speaker, what should be the record-keeping requirements of various aspects of the regime? And Mr. Speaker, in efforts to address these issues and to propose the amendments we have before us today, the central bank benchmarked the unclaimed asset regimes of several jurisdictions, including Australia, Barbados, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, United Kingdom, Switzerland, and of course the United States of America. As is entrenched practice, the central bank also conducted extensive consultations with the banks on the proposed amendments and posted the draft bills on its website on the 20th of February 2014 and again on the 29th of April 2026 for 90 days and 30 days respectively for public consultation. Beyond these initiatives, Mr. Speaker, an explanatory note in the form of questions and answers on the existing dormant accounts administrative framework and key aspects of the legislative proposals were published in the newspapers and posted on the central bank's website. We are satisfied that a thorough and considered approach was taken in the determination of these amendments. So, Mr. Speaker, allow me first to deal with the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Amendments Bill. I will now address the amendments proposed under the Banks and Trust Companies Amendments Bill, Mr. Speaker, that is 2018, which seek to repeal and replace Section 20 of the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Act 2000, referred to as BTCRA. And currently, this section only applies to deposit accounts that contain money and gold or silver bullion, and on which the account owner has conducted no transaction for a period of 7 years. However, the replacement Section 20 of the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Bill 2018 provides for the following provisions. Subsection 1. Subsection 1 expands and clearly identifies the types of accounts and facilities subject to dormant account requirements. Indeed, now will be a range of funds and assets, for example, checks, bank drafts, money orders, and precious metals such as gemstones. Jewelry, however, Mr. Speaker, is excluded because of their sentimental value, which complicates appraisal. Further, dormant securities accounts are being brought fully under this regime. Subsection 2 of the bill also expands the definition of dormant account to capture other facilities, such as those one-off transactions or instruments I have mentioned. Importantly, under paragraph B of the proposed definition of dormant account, an account will not be treated as dormant where the customer has multiple accounts or facilities with the bank and maintains communications with the bank in respect of any one or more of those accounts and or facilities, which evidences that the business relationship remains still active. Further, Mr. Speaker, the expanded definition will permit banks to consider actions initiated by a customer via electronic or other non-physical means in determining whether the deposit account or other facility is dormant. Subsection 3 of the amendments provides for the 7-year dormancy period to be calculated for a fixed deposit account from the date on which the fixed period terminated or the date the customer terminates his or her instructions to automatically renew the deposit, whichever is the latter. This will remove the lacunae, Mr. Speaker, in the existing law, which unintentionally captures fixed deposits and customers instruct their banks to automatically renew. Mr. Speaker, this is extremely important because individuals may have left instructions for an automatic renewal and individuals may have been dead 10, 15 years, but the automation continues to roll over. For other facilities, subsection 3C provides for the dormancy period to be calculated from the date on which the facility was issued, established, or the obligation to make a payment in respect of the facility accrued, whichever is the latter. Subsection 4 retains the existing obligation for banks to pay to the central bank dormant account amounts equal to and in the same currency denomination as any liability. This is inclusive of cash deposits found in dormant safety deposit boxes. It also, Mr. Speaker, codifies the requirement that banks make payments to the central bank unless exempted in writing by the central bank within 2 months after the end of the calendar year in which the account becomes dormant. Mr. Speaker, as I previously noted, these amendments also seek to bring dormant securities fully under this regime. At present, banks are required to transfer to the central bank cash dividends and other cash returns realized on dormant securities, but retain custody of the securities. Following the discussions with industry shareholders, the amendments seek to introduce a new obligation, which will require banks to treat dormant accounts containing precious metals, precious gemstones, excluding jewelry, and securities. That is, securities are not excluded, only jewelry. As transferable assets to be liquidated and the proceeds transferred to central bank upon the expiry of the 7-year dormancy period. Precious metals, Mr. Speaker, in the form of gold and silver bullion and cash deposits are already captured by the dormant accounts regime. Therefore, the requirement for the transfer or liquidation and transfer of the proceeds of sale of these types of assets found in safety deposit boxes creates consistency in the way that like assets are treated under the regime. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, as banks should not be required to absorb costs associated with liquidating assets as required by the law, subsection 4 will permit banks to deduct reasonable costs when so doing. And Mr. Speaker, in subsection 5, there are new obligations and protections for banks and others relating to the treatment of dormant accounts of gold and silver bullion and securities. This includes specifying the mechanisms by which their selling price subject to liquidation may be determined, the title rights of purchasers acquiring the liquidated securities, and the entitlements of and restrictions on persons who claim liquidated securities. Specifically, paragraph A and B of subsection 5 provide for securities listed on an established stock exchange to be sold at prices prevailing on the exchange at the time of the sale. They also provide for securities that are not listed on an established stock exchange to be sold over the counter at prevailing prices or by any reasonable method selected by the bank using its best efforts and having regard to current market conditions. These provisions, Mr. Speaker, are intended to protect the interests of account holders by ensuring that banks dispose of dormant assets at the best price at the time of the sale. Further, paragraph C and D of subsection 5 make provisions to protect the purchaser acquiring the disposed property and to take the property free of all claims of the owners and of all individuals claiming through or under them. As well, Mr. Speaker, it establishes the deductions that may be made against a dormant account or its proceeds of sale and makes clear that claimants are not entitled to receive any appreciation in the value of the property occurring after the sale of such property. In subsection 6, Mr. Speaker, there are provisions for treatment of precious metals, precious gemstones, and securities that cannot be sold, that are worthless, or that are not cost-effective to sell. In such cases, there is an exemption from the requirement for banks to liquidate these assets. They will be required, Mr. Speaker, to either transfer these to the central bank or its agents, or, at the discretion of the central bank, may continue to hold these as the central bank's agent. Subsection 7 provides statutory protection for those acting in furtherance of the requirements of the Act against any claims. In Section 8, Mr. Speaker, there is a record retention requirement for banks in respect to dormant accounts paid over to the central bank. This provision is intended to increase the level of accountability, transparency, and record keeping, commensurate with the central bank's aim of sound depositor protection. And subject to the provision of the proposed subsection 9, banks will be required to retain these records for a maximum period of 15 years after the transfer is made, or for a period of 5 years after making a payment to a dormant account claimant. Subsection 8 also seeks to impose a duty on banks that retain dormant accounts that are exempted from the transfer requirement and pursuant to subsection 6 to report to the central bank at such intervals to be determined by the central bank. Subsection 9 establishes separate record retention periods for dormant securities accounts, that is, a maximum period of 17 years after the transfer is made to the central bank, or for a period of 7 years after a payment to the claimant. And this amendment, Mr. Speaker, achieves consistency with the record retention requirements established under domestic security laws, which exceeds those under the AML-CFT regime. And subsection 10 and 11 set out the reporting requirements for exempted accounts and facilities. These are non-cash collateral, custody accounts, or safety deposit boxes, except for cash, precious metals, precious gemstones, excluding jewelry, found in such boxes, and such other deposit accounts or facility as the governor may, by regulation, determine. Subsection 12 maintains the existing provision for banks to facilitate an entitled individual's claim to a dormant account transferred to the central bank by that bank. But it also introduces an important new limitation, which requires that a claim be brought within 10 years of the fund being transferred to the central bank, effectively extinguishing a claimant's right to dormant account after that period has elapsed. This provision, Mr. Speaker, is in keeping with the practice observed in several jurisdictions, including Barbados, Canada, and the Cayman Islands. Currently, dormant account funds are transferred to the central bank in the currencies in which they are held by the bank. Claims are paid in the same currency. So, for example, if an account is in Swiss francs, the claim must also be settled in Swiss francs. This was found to be administratively cumbersome. Subparagraphs 1 and 2 of paragraph A of subsection 12 will now enable the central bank the flexibility to repay Bahamian dollar claims in Bahamian dollars and claims for any other currency in an equivalent currency amount. And subsection 12 also replicates the existing power of central bank to pay interest on dormant account balances transferred to it once claimed. What is new, however, is that it establishes the mechanism by which interest is to be calculated by providing that the central bank may, by written notice, determine the rate and manner of computation of interest payable by the bank. Mr. Speaker, the central bank would establish the interest rate with reference to market conditions and factors affecting the management of the dormant account fund in its custody. In subsection 13, provides for a bank to be discharged from liability with respect to balances owing on a dormant account once transferred to the central bank. This is a protection that is missing in the existing legislation. Subsection 14, Mr. Speaker, similarly provides for the central bank to be discharged from liability with respect to dormant account balances received from banks when the central bank either pays the equivalent of those balances to an individual entitled to claim them or makes a payment to the treasurer pursuant to subsection 1 of section 24 of the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2018. The final amendment, Mr. Speaker, subsection 15, will introduce a new general record-keeping obligation on banks to maintain a register of all dormant accounts that are either transferred to the central bank or its agent or retained by the banks. The register will be required to be available for inspection by the central bank's examiners. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2018, which seeks to repeal and replace Section 24 of the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act 2000. The amended bill will empower the central bank to deal more effectively with dormant account balances. The Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill 2018 retains the existing requirements for the central bank to accept funds transferred to it pursuant to Section 20 of the Banks and Trust Regulation Act and to pay interest on such funds. It is proposed, Mr. Speaker, to redesignate the existing Section 27 as subsection 1 of Section 24, subsection 24, my mistake. It is proposed to redesignate the existing Section 24 as subsection 1 of Section 24 and to introduce 12 new subsections immediately following it. The proposed subsection 2 codifies central bank's ability to establish a fund for the administration of dormant account proceeds from banks. This formalizes existing arrangements. It will also provide for the central bank to deduct from the fund for the first time an administrative fee to meet reasonable expenses in connection with the administration of this fund. The charge of such a fee is consistent with the practices of several benchmark jurisdictions and allows for operational transparency. Subsection 3, Mr. Speaker, will provide flexibility to the bank to pay to the treasurer dormant funds received in Bahamian dollars and those received in foreign currencies. That is another currency, example, United States dollars. It is intended to support the new subsection 10, which empowers the central bank to invest and to reinvest dormant account funds and to convert dormant account funds to other currencies for investment purposes as deemed prudent. This subsection also provides for central bank to pay to the treasurer all, let me repeat, this subsection also provides for the central bank to pay to the treasurer, 1, all dormant account balances valued at $500 or less within 2 months after being received by the bank, and 2, dormant account balances above $500 plus accrued interest after 10 years of receipt by the bank. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of these provisions, along with the provisions of subsection 5, 6, and 7 of the bill, is to provide a means by which dormant account balances owned by residents and non-residents that remain unclaimed for a minimum of 17 years, including the initial 7-year dormancy period, can be pooled, brought under the control of the treasurer, and employed for the benefit of the people of the Bahamas. It is important for me to repeat this, Mr. Speaker. I want to repeat this. The funds must have been unclaimed for a total of 17 years before they are put under the control of the treasurer for the benefit of the Bahamian people. This proposal aligns with the practices pursued by many of the benchmark jurisdictions. It provides for an orderly disposition of dormant account balances, which could accumulate ad infinitum if not claimed. Subsection 5, Mr. Speaker, discharges the central bank of all liabilities with respect to amounts paid to the treasurer pursuant to subsection 3 and imposes an obligation on the central bank to retain records relating to transferred dormant account balances of up to $500 for a minimum period of 15 years or for balances above $500 for a minimum period of 5 years. To explain this time frame, the 15-year period represents the 10 years during which a claimant's right to claim a dormant account balance subsists, plus 5 years following the extinguishment of such a claim. The 5-year period is in line with record-keeping requirements under the country's AML-CFT laws. Subsection 6 provides for funds transferred to the treasurer to form part of the consolidated fund and vested in the treasurer for the benefit of the Bahamas to cease to accrue interest. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, subject to subsections 7 and 8 of the bill, these funds are to be disposed by a resolution of both houses of Parliament. A resolution must be brought forth, Mr. Speaker. Subsection 7 and 8 provide for dormant account owners, their representatives or successors, to reclaim dormant account balances plus accrued interest where applicable at any time prior to the expiry of 10 years after receipt of such balances by central bank. For the purposes of calculating the 10-year period, the clock starts upon the transfer of dormant account balances to the central bank, and in the case of balances of $500 or less, continues to run after the funds have been transferred to the treasurer, but not beyond the 10 years. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, dormant account balances of more than $500 can only be reclaimed before they are transferred to the treasurer upon the expiry of the 10-year period. Subsection 7A will enable the central bank to repay Bahamian dollar claims in Bahamian dollars and claim for any other currency in an equivalent foreign currency amount. Currently, dormant account funds, Mr. Speaker, are transferred to the central bank in currencies in which they are held by the bank, and claims are paid in the same currency. Subsection 9 provides the minister, the treasurer, and the government protection from liability for funds from the treasurer to the central bank in respect of claims and to a person who claims funds after they have been paid by the treasurer to the central bank for onward payment to another person. This provision mirrors the protection from liability given to the central bank in subsection 5 and to banks in subsection 2014 of the Banks and Trust Companies Regulation Amendment Bill 2018. Similar provisions, Mr. Speaker, are found in legislation of several of the benchmark countries, including the Cayman Islands. In subsection 10, will empower the central bank to invest and reinvest dormant account balances transferred to it. This will codify existing practice and the bank's role as a prudent custodian. Subsection 11, Mr. Speaker, will permit the central bank to consider any period of the enactment of the bill when determining whether dormant balances held meet the relevant time requirement for transfer to the treasurer. And subsection 12 makes it a criminal offense for any person to make a fraudulent claim for dormant account balances. The penalty on summary conviction is a fine of $5,000 or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year, or both such fine and imprisonment. And subsection 13 proposes that every director or other officer concerned with the management of a body corporate be liable for a fraudulent claim made by that body corporate unless the director or other officer proves that the offenses was committed without his consent or connivance, or that he or she exercised reasonable diligence to prevent the commission of the offense. Mr. Speaker, permit me now to get down to brass tacks that others can understand. Mr. Speaker, permit me to share with honorable members some of the statistics on dormant accounts at the end of June 2018. Dormant accounts numbered 42,452, with a corresponding value of approximately 88,716 Bahamian dollar equivalent. I repeat, Mr. Speaker, dormant account numbered 42,452, with a corresponding value of approximately 88,716 Bahamian dollar equivalent. That is $88.716 million. Of the total number, 34,528 were Bahamian dollar accounts, which were valued at $18.921 million. Therefore, the average size for Bahamian dollar account was $548 compared with $7,837 for US dollar equivalent balances. Mr. Speaker, there were 32,542 accounts, or 77% of the aggregate number of accounts having a value of $500 or less, for a total of 3.875 million in dormant accounts. Of this total, Bahamian dollar accounts represent 88% or $3.11 million. Dormant accounts with values exceeding 500 and meeting the proposed 17 years dormancy threshold for extinguishment of claim, meaning our money, total 5,724, bearing a value of $37.4 million. Of this amount, Mr. Speaker, Bahamian dollar balances numbered 2,994 at a value of $7.584 million, which represents 52.3% of the total number of accounts, but only 20.3% of the value. By comparison, balances in US dollar equivalents are 25 million and 2,519 in number, accounted for less than 44% of the number of accounts, but a dominant 67% of the value. And Mr. Speaker, this part is important. Since inception, that is, since 1989, claims have totaled 29.8 million, or approximately 1/4 of the 118.5 million on original balances transferred to the central bank. The corresponding percentage for Bahamian dollar claim is 19.2% of the US dollar equivalent component, 22%. We are advised by central bank, Mr. Speaker, that based on these legislative proposals, the Treasurer we are advised by the central bank that based on these legislative proposals, the Treasurer would receive an initial flow of at least $41.3 million assessed at the end of June 2018. Allow me to repeat, Mr. Speaker, there's $41.3 million that are available that can be transferred to Treasurer as of June 2018. And a further stream of transfers as funds meet the 17-year threshold for extinguishment of claims should they not be claimed. Mr. Speaker, let me turn my attention to how these funds are to be used. We have compelling needs in a number of areas. Now, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about transferring $41.3 million or making an additional $41.3 million immediately available to the Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, governments must make mature decisions. We will hear arguments throughout the day that money should be used for sports. Sports encourage discipline, leadership, it provides opportunity, and most of all, you cannot pay for the type of public relations one receives. Others may argue that the money should be utilized for education, repairing of our schools, more teachers, preschool programs, and the construction of new schools. Some may argue, Mr. Speaker, that the money should be utilized for health, repairing our clinics and hospitals, obtaining all the new necessary equipment, and fast-track the telemedicine program that our minister speaks so passionately about. And others may argue that salaries should be changed. Doctors, nurses, public servants. Yes, union contracts. And some may argue that the $41.3 million should be used to assist social services, help more of the needy. Then, Mr. Speaker, we may hear the argument that $5 million that is being provided through the entrepreneurship program via University of Bahamas and the appropriate banks may not be adequate, and that should be increased, maybe to $10 million to help encourage more entrepreneurs. Then, with the problems that we see with unemployment among the young population, some may argue that there should be more individuals placed on the 52-week job program, thus decreasing our employment numbers. These are all great arguments, Mr. Speaker, but as I've said, governments must make matured, non-isolated decisions. An irresponsible opposition may argue, Mr. Speaker, that electricity cost is increasing and therefore money should be used to decrease light bills and to help turn individuals' lights whose lights are off to be turned on again. This may be, Mr. Speaker, this may be an attempt, great argument, but an attempt to work on individuals' social psyche, that is, the minds of the people. And yes, that is an argument. But we must look at what actually happened, and I won't go through that, Mr. Speaker, with the fire at the Clifton, subsequently shifting our resources to Blue Hill. And to relieve some of the stress and strain, you would note that we tabled a bill, Mr. Speaker, to increase the VAT exemption for individuals from $200 bills to $300. But, Mr. Speaker, that is still not sufficient, and our minister and his team is working to see how they can relieve that. But, Mr. Speaker, an irresponsible opposition will argue even further in isolation. They will argue that individuals are losing their homes and therefore it should be utilized for mortgage relief to save homes. That is an argument, but that is not a matured argument by an efficient, competent government. Then, Mr. Speaker, an immature opposition may argue that after the hurricane, many homes were damaged, an individual still has taps on their roofs and homes are leaking when we go through the Family Islands and in Grand Bahama, and therefore the funds should be utilized to repair homes. I ain't reached there yet. Then the member of Exuma, I'm sure as he rises, Mr. Speaker, will argue that the $41.3 million should be utilized for Ragged Island. But Mr. Speaker, a matured government must make responsible decisions.
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable members.
A matured government must make responsible decisions. And Mr. Speaker, that is why we must look at the establishment of a proper disaster relief fund. It is known, Mr. Speaker, that we are in a hurricane belt, and it's not a matter of if we will be struck, but it's a matter of when. Hurricanes, Mr. Speaker, can result in damage to our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our communication system, our light,
Honorable members, you're being disruptive.
As a result of the damage to our infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, members can reflect their memories to 9/11. Our infrastructure can be so damaged, inclusive of airport, that the investments within our country would crash overnight. Our tourism industry would crash overnight. Our banking system, financial system that needs digital systems and proper bandwidth would subsequently crash overnight. So, Mr. Speaker, it's essential to make decisions whether you concentrate in silo and your infrastructure is subsequently destroyed, thus your investment, thus your tourism and your banking, resulting in no economic activity or monies generated to repair or carry on your school system, your social service, your health, your security.
Honorable members, to my east, on the back bench, you're being disruptive.
So, Mr. Speaker, it is not my government's intent.
Honorable members,
it is not my government's intent to view this as a windfall for use in meeting budgetary normal operations. As a responsible government, we are proposing that these funds be utilized for establishing the proposed disaster relief fund that was foreshadowed in the most recent budget exercise. And the Speaker, I pointed out very clearly that if our infrastructure, our roads, our telephone, our lights, our airports are destroyed by a hurricane, and we cannot immediately embark on its repair, our economy would subsequently demise, and we would have no funds or no activity to repair the health system, the educational system, the social services, or encourage sporting. Mr. Speaker, I am traveling on Sunday to Washington for a meeting with the World Bank, the IMF, and IDB to discuss how do we deal with disaster management, damage as a result of hurricanes. This is an important matter because the world recognized that that should be placed as a priority as we move forward. And while traveling, Mr. Speaker, it is my intent, as I've made a commitment and promise, that I would have accompanying me a member of the backbench at every international trip, and the member for Fox Hill, Chanel Ferguson, will be accompanying me, Mr. Speaker.
You might be going on a one-way ticket.
You could have been traveling all the time. You were traveling with you as a girl, so I know what happened to you. Every week. Every week.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at that meeting is my intent to put not only the Bahamas' position, but CARICOM's position forward and recommendation as to how we can protect and sustain our economy by protecting our infrastructure, which is the foundation to the survival of our country. As a country, Mr. Speaker, we are faced with increased incidence and severity of hurricanes, which adversely affect fiscal sustainability and economic resilience. Members would recall that the International Monetary Fund in its recent Article 4 report on the Bahamas, has placed the optimal size of such a fund at between 2% and 4% of GDP, that is some $200 to $400 million. We constantly receive inquiries from credit rating agencies, investors and governments, international bond, and international institutional lenders about definitive measures being taken by the government to mitigate the risk associated with natural disasters, which could create havoc on our fiscal situation. The insurance, Mr. Speaker, with the Caribbean Catastrophic Risk Insurance Facility is important. It is important, but ultimately, it is insufficient to address all potential needs. And while the government, with its long-term fiscal sustainability plans, is intent on setting aside some 0.5% of GDP annually commencing 2020 for disaster relief, this recommended use of the dormant account funds provides an excellent opportunity to establish the proposed disaster relief fund at a credible initial level and demonstrate to Bahamians and the international community our seriousness in mitigating this material risk for fiscal sustainability and economic resilience. Mr. Speaker, climate change and global warming have increased both the frequency and ferocity of hurricanes in our region. Unfortunately, what used to be one in 100-year tropical events are now 1 in 10-year tropical events. Mr. Speaker, I want to repeat that. What used to be 1 in 100-year tropical events are now 1 in 10-year tropical events. So, for the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunately not a matter of if we will be hit by a major storm in the medium term. The question only is when. Any responsible government must plan accordingly. And when presented with an opportunity such as this, it must resist. I want the opposition to listen. Look up, Mr. Leader. It must resist the temptation for short-term measures and instead do the right thing with this windfall and for the right reasons. In doing so, Mr. Speaker, we can fund from regular means investment in the Bahamian people in priority areas such as education, healthcare, combating crime, youth development, and other areas. When we are inevitably hit by another hurricane or series of hurricanes across our archipelago, we will not have to scale back our expenditure and plans as much in key policy areas in order to divert resources to hurricane response and restitution. Mr. Speaker, what this clearly means is if we were to concentrate on what the arguments may be on schools, social services, health infrastructure, health needs, salaries, pay increases, power, phones, etc. When a hurricane is hit, yes, we will have beautiful schools. Yes, we will have good salaries. Yes, we will have excellent health facilities and whatever you utilize, spend the money on. But when hurricane hits, and our infrastructure is destroyed, monies are diverted from the consolidated fund, which would have been utilized for our schools, etc., to the repair work of the hurricane, thus resulting in collapse of your health, your school, your sports, your BEC, and whatever else. So, Mr. Speaker, it's essential that we protect and have reserves to protect our infrastructure, as this would protect our economy and our businesses, so that our investment, our businesses can continue, so that monies can be generated which can now be funneled into the healthcare system, educational system, as opposed to the reverse. I note that the next hurricane event will not need to disrupt the ordinary resources necessary in delivering government's manifesto in various portfolio areas. Thus, in keeping with best practices, my government will develop an appropriate governance framework for the proposed disaster relief fund, which will be used to address immediate disaster response needs and the restoration of public infrastructure, so that the mailboats can dock properly. The structure, utilization, and reporting on this fund will comfort to international standards of accountability and transparency. Further, Mr. Speaker, all Bahamians can rest assured, and this is most important, Mr. Speaker, if you heard nothing, this is most important for the Bahamian people, because they are concerned about transparency, they are concerned about accountability, and they are concerned about how their monies are spent. So all Bahamians can be rest assured that the enabling framework for this fund will come to Parliament and be enshrined in legislation. No matter who sits in the seat of governance in the future, this should not dissolve into some sort of slush fund to be used irresponsibly by narrow political ends, for narrow political ends, at least not without the public being fully aware. Let me repeat. I still got 9 minutes, so I can repeat. No matter who sits in the seat of governance in the future, this should not dissolve into some sort of slush fund to be used irresponsibly for narrow political ends, at least not without the public being fully aware. Those days, Mr. Speaker, are hopefully and mercifully over. The public well remembers the massive abuse of hurricane relief funds by various individuals. This is a new day, Mr. Speaker. This is a new day with a new approach to doing things in a new era of innovation and transformation. And this is even very important also, Mr. Speaker. Until this is in place, until this legislation is in place, we intend, Mr. Speaker, to allow the central bank to segregate the funds and continue to manage them on behalf of the Disaster Relief Fund. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, you want me to repeat it? Let me repeat it slowly. Until that is the legislation, so that you don't waste the money, you have to spend it responsibly. Until, yeah, well, he won't be elected. Not, he and I go, well, he going in 2022. I going in 2027. But we'll still be friends. We'll be company. Huh? No.
He's talking
No.
to Zuma.
2027, I am going to bid politics well, and I'm going to farm. I am waiting to plant all my exotic fruits. I know you can buy some exotic fruits. Carambola, Julie Mango, Kent, all right, sugar soursop, sugar apple.
What about the corned beef?
Huh? No, I can't grow corned beef. I'll eat corned beef. But I will eat. I'm going up. I've been up now, you know. I don't eat corned beef. It's corned beef goulash.
Not that far.
Anyhow, until this is in place, Mr. Opposition, we intend to allow the central bank to segregate the funds and continue to manage them on behalf of the disaster relief fund. In other words, you won't get your hand on it. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, my government considers the proposed legislative amendment to the dormant account regime as comprehensive. These amendments should markedly improve the transparency and effectiveness with which dormant accounts are administered by banks, while enhancing the central bank's oversight in this area. The proposed use of the funds will also redound, that is, contribute greatly to the benefit of all Bahamians as we seek to fortify our ability to respond to natural events that could destabilize the best of economic and fiscal plans. Mr. Speaker, I commend the bills to this honorable House. May God continue to bless us all, and may God continue to bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas and inclusive of the wonderful people of the great Kalani constituency, of which the leader of the opposition is a member. Thank you.
Is there a seconder? Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for St. Ives.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second the two bills before us, and I'm fortunate to do so, having had the leader of my party give such an admirable account of how the amendments came about. Let me just harp on or go back to several issues he said. These bills first came out in 2016, 2014, and have been subject to consultation between the banks, the Clearing Banks Association, the AIBT, Bahamas Financial Services Board, and the likes, so that we have reached to this point on a consultative basis. I heard member for Katanan say, while seated admittedly, and not trying to read on the record, that his party would have done it differently. That's a matter that he'll no doubt bring up when he does. But the issue is, there were some 40,000 accounts outstanding that have been dormant. Now, I also heard somewhere that the idea is we teeth into people's money. I heard that. I won't attribute it to where I heard it from, but
I heard it, but I ignored it.
But let's look at it. Any of you that go in the bank, and I go in banks regularly, and I've had dormant accounts. I haven't used them because they sit there, and nothing, it might be my nephew's account or my niece's savings account or something, and you just don't use them. Many of us have that. So I go in the bank, and they regularly hand me a form that says dormant account form. and you fill it out. Brent Simonet, account number, address, fax, and you put one $10 or one $5 on the account, and the account is reactivated. I'd remember that account. So that is what we're talking about. So this happens regularly probably to many people. And then you see the provision the member for Clarny mentioned is that they take into account where you have related accounts in the bank. So these are people who have no contact with a bank. Now, interestingly enough, interest on your account doesn't count for an activity. So if you're earning interest on your account, the banks don't consider that. So it has to be a deposit, a withdrawal, and instruction. So these are people that have never been in a bank for years. I found the other day I had a dormant account. I set up a birthday account for one of my nephews, put the savings account in a drawer, forgot about it, and it's probably $200, $300. So it's probably one of these same accounts that's been deemed dormant. You then get people, for instance, and many of us as lawyers know, and this is another example. There are 40, I think I'm close to being right, some 40,000 companies that should be struck off the register of companies because they're not active. To get a company, as lawyers in here know, to be struck off, you have to deem it either to be not carrying on business or has no assets or liabilities. You have to go to your lawyer, have them write a letter, and have them then go to the register and have that struck off. Sometimes the company's gone out of business, they don't have any money, let alone to pay the lawyer to go and do this, so it sits there. So we have, in addition to this, some 40,000 companies just sitting there that should be struck off the register. So no doubt the AG and others will bring an amendment in short order that the government can go in and do the same thing with companies. We're not teething people's companies because under the regulations, when a company is struck off, as many of you know, those assets vest in the treasurer, and they're actually protected under, I think it's Article 27 of the Constitution, which no doubt will be raised as an issue here. And there's a way you can apply to the government to have your property reinstated back to yourself once you prove the beneficial ownership. So this is not a new operation. We have it certainly with striking off of companies, et cetera, et cetera. So as I say, we need to also address that issue. As I travel internationally with regard to financial services, there is an evolving issue with regard to tightening up the way we govern, the way we manage financial services. And dormant accounts is another example of what has to be done to modernize the banking system. So this bill, the Central Bank Act and the other one have not been amended since 2000 odd, some 20 odd years ago. You have these accounts sitting out here. So and as a member for Clarny mentioned, many of them are $200, $300, $400, $500 accounts. Where in the case of the international people, they might have left the Bahamas. It might have been a company operating here. We're not talking on the whole about a large amount of dollars in every single account. So the reality is you try and close, forget opening an account. We all know that. You try closing an account for which you have no need for anymore. Quite often people just say, it ain't worth it, and leave that amount sitting in that account. And so when we talk about teething the people's money, this isn't about teething the people's money. This is money people have forgotten or chose to have forgotten happens to be in our banks. You take that period of time of 10 years, so some guy hasn't been in the bank. You mean none of us have been in a bank for 10 years? We've got to have been. For $200? $500? So the reality is, whilst we hype this up and teething people's money and what you're going to do with it and all of that, let's look at the basic issue. You've got 40,000 accounts that people have not touched for 7 years. It then goes to the central bank, and we talk 17 years. So that means I'm 64 next week, so let's take that away. I haven't touched it since I was 40-something. Please. Oh, don't stop. I'll leave it in cash and go before I don't need it. So that's the reality. A lot of times we close bank accounts or forget to close bank accounts. People die. Let's say you die and the only thing you have is a bank account at the Royal Bank of Canada, and you have to probate your will to get that $100 to $200. People aren't going to do it. So I think we have to look at what really is behind all of this. We've got 40,000 accounts that no one's touched, and we're going to move them into another vehicle, and you have the right, and anyway, someone might argue that the Constitution means you're taking away people's right to property. Well, the Constitution in some degree has to be a fluid and flowing and interpretive, and the Constitution also preserves the right to go to the Supreme Court and question that ability, whether the government's taken away the right. So we're moving 40,000 odd accounts with an average of $200 to $500 in them over to then from the banks to the central bank. Now, we talk about the cost of doing business. Well, it has to move in a 7-year period. The banks keep it for a while. And the cost to the banks, which is the point I'm coming to, the cost to the Royal Bank, CIBC, whatever bank you deal with, is expensive to maintain those dormant accounts. They're active, there's KYC, there's all sorts of issues, so that's an expense on the bank to maintain those. So they maintain them for 7 odd years, or whatever the period is, move them to the central bank, and then they go from the central bank to the consolidated fund or wherever they go. We're talking 17 years for an account for $200. You know, any of you that have account, I remember I used to have an account at Barclays. I can use them because they're not in business anymore. And they used to charge you so much a month just for having the account. Well, if you left that account on it, your account would be negative in 17 years because $200 only takes 10 months at a couple of dollars, your account's gone. So that's the reality. I think a lot of these accounts persons have either forgotten about, moved on, it's too expensive to reclaim them. So we need to clean up that issue. Same way I mentioned we need to clean up the 40,000 bank account companies that are sitting there. The other day in Brussels, or in Paris, whichever, the international organization said to the group of us, you have 200,000 companies in the Bahamas. I don't know where they got that figure from, but I'll just accept they're correct. And only 4,000 pay business license. So you see, these are statistics that the international community look at and know what we're doing here. So they're saying, well, most of your companies operating, not paying business license, so something's wrong with your tax system. So, of course, I had to try and help them out a little bit by saying under our law, for instance, in my case, the house I live in, is owned by a company. It has no bank account, it has no other assets. So then, when we bring some legislation here with regard to financial services, they talk about passive companies as opposed to active companies. So we have to bring our banking facilities, the way we do banking, forward into the modern age. And this is one of the vehicles by which we do it. Number one, expenses. Number two, to get rid of those dormant accounts that are sitting out there. The consultation has happened around this procedure. Three, the persons, as I mentioned, have probably forgotten about them, died, it's too expensive, for multiple reasons. Now, I read, I think in the newspapers, we should chase these people down. 40,000 accounts, we should have government employees chase people around the world for $200? Well, then the banks. So the leader, member for Caroline, said the banks should do that. That's an expense. And it's someone else's money they've left and forgotten or don't want to come and claim. And we have to go chase them? No, because they have put, you know, when I open a bank account, whenever you open a bank account, you enter into a contract with the bank. You sign a contract. I agree to operate an account within the banking procedures, within the laws of the Bahamas. And that's probably where Article 27 may not come into effect, because it's a contract with the bank, not apprehending property. So you have to look at that when you speak. So maybe Article 27 does not catch, may not catch this, and maybe Article 28 preserves it. So that's an argument for a different day. But the main thrust I'm trying to get across here today is there are multiple accounts on average of $200 to $500. Now, if these were accounts for $50,000, $1 million, people wouldn't have forgotten about it. Trust me. If any of us had $1 million sitting in an account for 17 years that we weren't using, we'd know about it. We'd find a way to get to it. Even I would, before someone else says it. No, but there aren't that many. But then those are probably legal reasons because of They don't want to come above the radar screen. There's maybe a case where two brothers are arguing or something. I don't know. You know, there's umpteen reasons why that doesn't happen. But I doubt whether there's more than a handful of those cases in this number. There's probably not even, there's probably less than 100 in this case. So we know, the point I'm making is we shouldn't hype this thing up. We wouldn't help, you know, hype this thing out that we thief in a bunch of people's money, because those people probably have, as I say, abandoned. So that's, I want to try and hopefully put that issue out of the way. Yeah, but whether it's 200 or whether it's 500, the threshold had to happen at some particular point. So what's $500 in this? So, but it was the point is, and I'm trying to answer the member for Cat Island, is this was a negotiated, consultative process by which the banks, the government, the clearing banks, so the various organizations came. So they must have had a reason. There's a lot of accounts. I remember in the 2000s, when we had this blacklisting way back then, we then started saying people had to open a bank account with KYC and everything. And I know of a particular banking institution that had 55,000 savings accounts. The average in those savings accounts probably didn't hit $5,000 a year. Nowhere even near it. And you had to have the same compliance for 55,000 savings accounts as you did for one account that might have $55,000 going through it a day. So, I mean, I think we have to balance the reasoning on this whole matter. So we get them out of the local banks so they won't have that problem. They are preserved, as you heard the member for Killarney say, is protected. You have the right to apply to get your money. That's no new vehicle. You have it I mentioned you have it under the Companies Act. When a company's struck off, you end up then having it going on to the treasurer. You apply. We come here used to come here by resolution. We've now changed the rules so you can get your property back. That's a vehicle that's protected. It's covered under these amendments. So you come forward, you say to the treasurer, the central bank, the government, I'm the owner of account number 2000002. Hopefully that's a fictitious account. And that I'm entitled to my money back. You prove it, and the money comes back. In the meantime, with those funds that are over that, it goes into the treasury of the consolidated fund, and then as the Prime Minister mentioned, it has to be only disposed of by resolution of both houses of Parliament, which comes within the ambit of the Financial and Audit Act, as well as ways of dealing with money. And I think Member for Killarney went to great extent to say this fund won't be used as what we politically like to call a slush fund. It'll be for particular issues, so that the money is put to use against the background that it's safeguarded. Bills, again, another issue, bills tend, the two acts we're talking about, have a life expectancy, and events move on. And this is an example of where we've trying to amend we are amending two acts rather, with the two bills before us, to bring the legislation up to par with normal banking practices. It's been benchmarked. Maybe we don't like the benchmark, but Member for Killarney mentioned the different countries, Barbados, UK, US, and so on and so forth. Yes, he highlighted that we are putting a 10-year limitation on the right, but that is a limitation. We accept that. But if you get it against the background of the length of time, as I said, you might not like the benchmark we used. You might have done it differently. You might have done it differently. But we're talking about $200 to $500 on average, and we want to hold that up for 100 years? I mean, at some point, we have to look at the reasonableness of that. The government has looked at it. They feel the 10-year period is reasonable, and therefore persons have the opportunity to come forward. So, Mr. Speaker, I only rose to make those few points because obviously those in the opposition may not agree with it. But on the whole, the amendments before us today, gone through a consultation process. You notice they're not saying anything about that. Anytime we don't consult, they're jumping up and down saying you didn't consult. This was a matter that started under their period. We are bringing finality to it, maybe not in the way they want to, in my opinion, you're protected by reason of the fact you can go to the government, Treasury, or central bank and get your money back. It talks about interest capping interest, because at some point you got to cap this interest. You can't have $200 accounts earning interest for 100 years, because I mean it's unmanageable. But when a claim is made, interest will then start to accrue, and payment could be made in the currency of convenience. It might have been a currency that went out of some of the Eastern European countries that don't have currencies anymore. So you can, rather than Swiss francs, you can pay in US dollars. So it gives it the treasurer and the central bank flexibility. So, Mr. Speaker, with all of those reasonings and backing up the thorough presentation by the member for Killarney, I stand here to second the two bills before us as a progressive and timely piece of legislation to move the Bahamas into the 2020s and beyond as we seek to reposition our country as the clear choice for financial services around the world. Thank you very much.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read for a second time and committed. A bill for an act to amend the Central Bank of the Bahamas Act to provide for the transfer to the treasurer and disposal of dormant account balances paid to the central bank and for connected purposes. As many, the chair recognizes the honorable member for Exumas and Ragged Island.
Thank you indeed, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of Exumas and Ragged Island, who I'm grateful to represent, I stand to contribute to the amendments to the Bank and Trust Companies Regulations Amendment Bill and the Central Bank of the Bahamas Amendment Bill in order to facilitate dealing with dormant accounts. Mr. Speaker, before I delve into the substance of my remarks, I want to point out how offended I was today as I drove into Roston Square and I saw all of the bleachers erected in the square, notwithstanding that I was aware that just behind me there was a demonstration of the people coming to Roston Square. And I would have thought that, we would have facilitated their presence in the People's Square. I thought that we would have done all we can not to suppress association, not to dilute association.
Honorable member.
You know better than he just reached.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro. On a point of order.
On a point of order. In the House. I was properly assisted by the honorable member for Cat Island, one of the most prominent QCs at the bar, would know that these matters are controlled by the Commissioner of Police, an autonomous body set up by the Constitution of the Bahamas. You have to apply to the Commissioner of Police in order to demonstrate. Those bleachers went there long before the whole march was conceived. The Commissioner determines how you do things. So to say that the government is doing this, it's very misleading, Mr. Speaker. And it should not be done. I expect better of Exuma and Ragged Island. Don't take cheap shots.
Honorable members.
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, as we proceed forward with respect to the matter before us today, the chair is not inclined to accept any further comments and discussions with respect to what is happening outside. We want members to focus their attention on the matter before us. Because, honorable member, any more voice like that from you, you will be dealt with under Rule 88. As I was saying, the matters, honorable member for Pine Ridge, resume your seat. As I was saying, honorable members, this matter that is before us today has absolutely nothing to do with what is happening on the outside. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Exumas on Ragged Island.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted that we live in a great democracy in our country, Mr. Speaker. I'm delighted that we have an opportunity to gather freely. I'm delighted that we have an opportunity to speak freely. I'm delighted that I have the opportunity on behalf of the people of Exuma and Ragged Island to speak freely in this House, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, if I am offended as a citizen of the country, I believe I have the right to say so in this House, Mr. Speaker. Respectfully. Respectfully, Mr. Speaker. And I was offended today, Mr. Speaker. And I wish to express that on the record. Now, we may not always agree in this place, but certainly I have a democratic right to speak to it. Now, Mr. Speaker, with respect to the Dormant Accounts Bill, I'm here to speak on that. But Mr. Speaker, we must uphold in every respect the right to associate, the right to demonstrate, the right to speak. And this is what our democracy is built upon. And we must not dilute it. We must not suppress it. Now, I will not descend into the discussion of who put the bleachers up. I want to make the fundamental point, Mr. Speaker, that we live in a great democracy. And I am delighted to live in this great democracy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in relation to this bill or the bills before us, as far as I can tell, it's been driven by and large by the central bank, and in substance is generally in line with international best practice, except in some respects for the reclaimed features which I will speak to. Mr. Speaker, except for a few quirks that I will point out, the bills seem generally in line with most developed systems of law. And I note the Prime Minister earlier made reference to a few jurisdictions. I have a few other jurisdictions that I'd like to refer to that doesn't necessarily align with the point made by the Prime Minister. And I will come to that point later on. Notwithstanding a bill that speaks to dormancy and ordinarily a straightforward piece of legislation, it seems the public relations machinery of this administration went into overdrive to quell suspicions about what would ordinarily be, as I mentioned, a straightforward piece of legislation. Clearly, even though this administration says it's the people's time, the people have clearly lost trust and confidence in this government. You say it's the people's time, but the people are not pleased. And this is why when we bring straightforward pieces of legislation, there's any number of suspicious theories and conspiracies that come to fore because the people are indeed restless, they don't trust this government, and there's a credibility deficit. This is why your PR machine have had to go into overdrive on a fairly straightforward piece of legislation. And although this administration would like to claim ownership of everything, this has been a work in progress, and the central bank has done a tremendous job since its establishment in 1974, has been the bedrock of monetary policy. It has overseen the accumulation of great wealth in the Bahamas and has managed to oversee our banking sector without any significant systemic issues and keep the Bahamian dollar stable in all those years. It is a well-run organization that has lived up to its mandate, and I'm impressed with its recent efforts to keep up with the changing nature of how money works and moves through the world and the need to evolve with digital currencies. T. Boswell Donaldson, Sir William Allen, James Smith, Julian Francis, Wendy Craig, and now John Roll have been exemplary governors and represent the pinnacle of accomplished Bahamian banking expertise. There is much to be proud of in them and the bank, and I have confidence in the stewardship of the central bank on these matters. However, these matters come before us for public consumption and is debated here in order to make them better. And in this vein, we intend today to propose amendments to these bills to ensure that they meet international standard and best practice in most of their applications. The first change of this legislation I would like to see is that funds from dormant accounts transferred to the Treasury not be treated as a source of revenue for the government. These funds should continue to be segregated from the consolidated fund and earmarked for specific purposes. And I heard the mover of the bill talk about disaster funds and a lot of other ideas that the government might have for these funds, but it is written in the bills that this will become a part of the consolidated fund, and I believe it because it's the intended action of this government to enact it. Now, everything else, Mr. Speaker, as far as I'm concerned, is just talk. For example, we should use this fund for investment in youth empowerment, family island development, sports facilities or schools, or somewhere where an injection of capital funds could make a difference. This money isn't actual revenues, you know, though it makes sense for the state to have a way to deal with these dormant accounts. The money is removed from an account that was open with every intention of having these funds used by an entity or an individual. As the legislation provides for reimbursement of this fund, it would be bad form to spend this money from the consolidated fund for recurrent expenditure, paying bills for everyday expenses. I repeat, it is unjust to classify it as government revenues and book it to the consolidated fund, in my view. Secondly, I think that before the government embarks on essentially seizing money from these accounts, there should be provisions in the bills and regulations to mandate that a notice is prescribed in a prescribed form be given to customers that this is what's going to happen. This bill should require the bank contact the customer via their last known address or even via public notice to have the bank advise them of the pending dormancy of these accounts. The bank must be able to demonstrate to have made attempts of doing so. I also find that the requirements for notice are set out in some legislation, like the Insurance Act, for notice by mail or registered mail is archaic, especially in the realm of modern technology and the inefficient postal services. So when we amend the bills to require notice, I would recommend that we consider the modern approaches for delivering such notices. Dormancy, in my view, is often the result of bad customer service. There is no measure here to impose a heightened level of care on the bank and trust companies, but there should be. In Section 15J of the Bank and Trust Regulations Bill, for example, there ought to be a standard which should raise the level of fiduciary responsibility to make reasonable attempts to reach customers. These measures would discharge a cavalier performance on the part of the bank responsible for sending correspondence. We want to make sure to be seen not to be seizing accounts when the banks themselves have not done appropriate follow-ups. The reality is that Bahamians, once they put their money aside for a purpose, they generally take the view that their money is safe and there's nothing else that they need to do because they've created the deposit. Section 11, which will effectively make this legislation retroactive, will create a windfall for the government based on those accounts now in the system without any checks and balances as to whether the banks were prudent in their responsibility to inform the customer of pending dormancy. Thirdly, I raised the question of the flawed rationale in Section 4 of the Central Bank Amendment Bill that requires banks to turn over to the treasurer faster and to stop paying interest on smaller accounts under $500, but apply more leniency and pay interest for a longer period, it appears, to accounts over $500. It seems inherently unfair. What is good for the goose must be justly good for the gander. Everyone, big and small, should get the same treatment inclusive of applying interest to the accounts. Amounts up to $499 or $500 may seem like small change to some of us, but to a person making minimum wage, it is significant. Mr. Speaker, the segment further creates a level of bureaucracy and administration for the Treasury, in my view, that the central bank is better suited to manage. Mr. Speaker, there are no provisions apparently in this bill that speaks to the reclaim and the potential claim of a owner of these funds after the stipulated 10-year period. The Prime Minister, in his opening remarks, spoke to parallels in some jurisdictions, and I believe he named Barbados and Cayman Islands and Canada. But I would invite the government to look further, slow this down a little bit, and let's look at the UK, let's look at the US, let's look at Ireland, let's look at Japan, and we will discover that notwithstanding the transfer of funds to a reclaim account, let's call it a reclaim fund, there is always a provision for reclaim. And even though the funds in the reclaim account or fund may be used for social or other purposes, it is never too late for someone to claim or reclaim these funds. In fact, it was pointed out earlier that in Canada, it's 100 years. So let's dig deeper. Let's look at the UK, the US, Ireland, Japan, and let's look at Canada. And we will, in fact, discover that in all of these jurisdictions, there are attempts to create reserves in these funds to ensure that the owners are not disenfranchised. Mr. Speaker, there is a constitutional point to be made, and I know that my learned leader, Queen's Counsel, will make this point eloquently. But Mr. Speaker, I believe it's important that we consider carefully these points and whether the provisions to compulsorily acquire money in a way that we do land is in line with our constitutional provisions, Article 27(2)(I). Also, I flagged the following points for further consideration, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, the definition of dormant accounts on page 3 of the Bank and Trust Amendment Bill seems awkward. Should it be that so long as the customer has at least one account that is active, all of his accounts should remain active, rather than the other way around? Point 2, the section relating to safety deposit boxes must also be revisited. It seems the bill authorizes the bank to invade the privacy of a box holder whether they have not been checked by a customer for 7 years, even if they have paid or even if they continue to pay for that service. Thirdly, I invite you to consider it. Thirdly, Clause 9B in the Central Bank Amendment Bill appears strange in that it seems to absolve the government of liability if they settle a claim incorrectly and someone else claimed the same account later on. I doubt that this is what was intended, and I urge the government to look at it. So to me, there seemed to be a level of consumer protection missing. You know, a lot of these issues we bring to bear in here ought to be at the heart of what we should be about, protecting consumers. Who is looking out for the people? Who's looking out for the consumers? I suggest that as elected officials, we must champion the cause of consumers. what we find is that in banking and public utilities, etc., there seems to be more consideration for the entity that consumers who feed money into these entities and expect from them a level of care and protection. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, people are irate over high electricity costs and escalating BPL bills that are hurting Bahamian families and will ultimately spell the demise of countless number of Bahamian businesses. Some of this is perhaps due, in the minds of the people of the country, to the reckless VAT increase, which I'd note again for the record that this side voted against. But a lot of what we see with BPL appears to be a lack of duty of care to manage the cost downward, where we already have one of the highest rates of electricity in the region. So you claim to care by saying no VAT on bills under $200, but then the bills rise dramatically on your watch, as we told you that they would. And then you come back and you say, well, we're going to increase it to 300, which I told you in the first instant when it was 200, it seemed like gimmickry in the first place. Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
The member seems to be gearing up in the bullpen, and we are at the 1 o'clock hour. Perhaps it's a good place for us to take a break. Looks like he has another 15 minutes or so. And so I would move 20 minutes. Clock say 12.
That's right.
That's how you do it. No, I'm not countering such a mess.
Oh, the speaker was talking. But we'll take a break. Mr. Speaker, I do move that the House suspends until 3 p.m. today. We'll take our lunch break, and after that, Mr. Speaker, the member for Exuma and Ragged Island, and they'll then take the floor.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
All rise!